Hey guys, Victor here coming at you again with another discussion video, with today's focus being how to beat purrely. And I'm going to be honest, even though purrely is currently one of the top decks in the current metagame, it's pretty easy to play against, if I'm being honest, just because there aren't really like any spectacular plays that it can make. It's honestly super linear in the fields that it makes and how it goes about making them. So as a result, it makes it very easy to prepare for and properly beat. So with that out of the way, let's just jump straight into the video. Now, before we can actually talk about how to beat the deck, we have to look at their end board. And like I said earlier, Purrely's end board is pretty much going to be the same no matter who you play against, just because the deck doesn't really have that many options. It's incredibly linear in its playstyle, so it's pretty much always going to end on this if possible. But there are some hands that allow them to extend some more, such as if they're able to get access to the field spell. Sometimes they play rank 1s to help them draw more cards, things like that. But for the most part, this is pretty much going to be the essence for the Purrely end board. And let's start with Purrely Yeep. So this card pretty much allows them to rank up during your turn or their turn, pretty much whenever. And what they're going to be making is going to be X Purrely Noir. However, with Purrely Yeep, there's another benefit to the X Purrely Noir, and that's because with Purrely as a deck, they're typically going to be drawing 2 cards off their first Exceed monster that's already on the field, thanks to their quick plays being attached to it as material. And then with Purrely Yeep, they're going to be activating it also during the standby phase, and then in addition to that, they're going to be drawing an additional 1 to 2 cards. So when it comes to Purrely's end board, their hands are typically going to be really depleted, so they're going to rely on these draws to actually be able to compete in the game, because one X Purrely Noir is not going to be the be-all, end-all in actually being able to achieve victory. So you got to keep that in mind when actually preparing for this deck. And then let's talk about My Friend Purrely. So this card is pretty much just going to be mainly used for their turn, because it's going to be their main search power, and it's going to be one of the more important cards that they're always going to be getting access to. But when it's your turn, or just like after turn 1, I guess, when their Purrely monster leaves the field because of you, My Friend Purrely will in turn allow them to add 3 quick plays from their graveyard back to their hand. So it's a great method to be able to add back to their resources and just replenish their hand. And usually if you do get rid of the Exceed, they're going to have a full hand to be able to try and break through your board and play on the next turn. So, pretty important, but it's honestly whatever. It's pretty much like non-existent, especially because if you're playing against Purrely, the ultimate goal is to OTK them so that the deck does not achieve another turn. Because if they do get another turn, it's going to be really bad really fast. And then lastly, we have X Purrely Noir. This is the main boss monster of the deck, and they're going to try to end on this every single time. And by that, I mean they're going to try to make it during your turn, just because the turn that it's when this card has like 5 or more materials, it's unaffected by things. It's able to bounce cards to the bottom of the deck, whether it's on the field or from the graveyard. And then it completely ignores Purrely Yeep's effect of bouncing back during the end phase, because it's unaffected when it has 5 or more materials. So, pretty simple, straightforward, not really a lot of complexity to this board. You just have your bounces that can be activated multiple times. My Friend Purrely, which gets back cards, and then Purrely Yeep, which in turn gets back or allows you to rank up to draw more resources. So with that, now we can finally discuss how to actually beat the deck. So first up, I want to talk about the floodgates. So these are typically going to be cards that you're always going to be setting first, but they're honestly still pretty effective even if you're going second. And that's just because they stunt the Purrely deck so much. So let's start with There Can Be Only One. Every single Purrely monster is a fairy type, which means that There Can Be Only One is really effective against that deck. However, just be aware there are a lot of link monsters that the Purrely deck plays currently that allows them to get their Purrelys off the field and then in turn eventually get rid of There Can Be Only One. But it usually involves them investing a lot of resources to actually just be able to remove this one card. So if you have something like an Effect Veiler or an Imperm, for example, to pair with it, There Can Be Only One, you're honestly going to be sitting really pretty, because the deck just cannot function while this card's on the field, because the moment they get a Purrely monster on the field, they're locked out of their entire Exceed extra deck. And a lot of the times they can just straight up win the game. And the same can be said for Dimensional Barrier. Unlike There Can Be Only One, they don't really have a method to get rid of this. Once it's flipped, the game's pretty much over at that point. And that's just honestly the case with Purrely. If you flip Dimensional Barrier, they don't have access to their Exceeds. And if they don't have access to their Exceeds, they cannot play. And if they can't play, well, like I said, you win the game. So pretty straightforward, honestly. And it's one of like Purrely's biggest weaknesses, just because even though the deck is super consistent and good at what it does have some really glaring weaknesses that can be exposed very easily thanks to cards such as this. And with the floodgates out of the way, let's move on to the hand traps. Now, when it comes to hand trapping Purrely, for the more inexperienced players, this could be a major issue that you actually run into, because all their cards surge and do so many different things that you might be quickly overwhelmed. But no need to worry, because I'm here to tell you that it's honestly really simple to beat Purrely with your hand traps. And what I'm going to be saying is that you should not be ashing anything that's not Purrely, the Black Cat, or My Friend Purrely, because every single one of the other cards that can be ashed are not hard ones per turns, and you typically want to save them for when their resources are low, right? So if they activate like a quick play, you ash it, all right, cool. They still have 4 cards and they're typically gonna have another quick play and you've already burned your ash. So what are you gonna do? You literally can't do anything because your ash is hard once per turn. And the same thing goes for like Purrely, the white cat. Every single one of those effects can be activated on summon each time it's summoned. So even if you stop the first one, it's not gonna benefit you greatly. You want to save it for the hard once per turn effects. So when it comes to Ash Blossom, let's talk about that first, I guess. Just save it for either the My Friend Purrely, which is the continuous spell that searches, which is a hard once per turn, or for the Purrely, which is the Black Cat, which is also a hard once per turn search that guarantees them anything. You'd much rather leave Purrely up to chance because it just reveals the top 3 cards, and sometimes, let's face it, that deck does not always hit. But if it's like the mid to late game, then it's okay to Ash Blossom cards like that. But for the early game when it's just starting, pretty much avoid that at all costs. And the same logic can be applied to cards such as Infinite Impermanence and DD Crow. Now, Infinite Impermanence, like I said, save it for the Black Cat every single time. You can save it for either the Search or the Summon. Either one is perfectly fine. It really depends on what you have in your hand. Like if you have Droll and Lockbird, for example, in your hand, which it's okay against Purrely, but it's not amazing, which is why I'm not showcasing it here. But if you have Droll and Lockbird, you just let them search with their Purrelys, and it's perfectly fine. And then when they try to activate their Purrely effect to rank up, you imperm, since it's a hard once per turn to rank up into something. They basically just have to leave the Purrely there, and they can't do anything with it. So a lot of times that can just straight up in the game as well. And then for DD Crow, same logic, just save it for the Purrely trying to rank up, because if you're DD Crowing the spell card that it targets, it won't be able to rank up into whatever monster, whether it's like Plump, Happiness, whatever. And it also has like an additional benefit that you can use it on Purrely Yeep when it tries to recycle back resources to hit key cards out of their graveyard to try and make it fail and just, ultimately disrupt them for the easy wins. So hopefully this helps a little bit. I know when you're like a newer player, and you see, it's like the Master Duel syndrome, right? You see the button flash and you have to use it, but you have to be really smart about when to use your hand traps. And luckily there's only really 2 cards that are worth hand trapping at any given point, being the Purrely and the My Friend Purrely. And with that, let's just move on to the generic cards that should be able to win you this matchup. Now, when it comes to generic cards that you use to beat Purrely, these 2 are probably going to be the best, and these are Book of Moon and Exceed Encore. So for Book of Moon, you could also play Book of Eclipse, for example, but I don't really enjoy Book of Eclipse just because it can be ashed, so it's a little bit more susceptible, as opposed to Book of Moon, which you're typically going to be using the moment they activate their Purrely to try and rank up their monster into X-Purrely Noir. If you're able to Book of Moon it, they can't rank up, and if they can't rank up, that means you've pretty much got free reign to do whatever you want, if I'm being honest, because they only have the 2 cards in their hand to stop you, maybe some floodgates if it's game 2 and 3, but for the most part, it doesn't really matter. Stopping that rank up into X-Purrely Noir is crucial in order to win this matchup, so something like Book of Moon really does shine in this deck, or against this deck. And then when it comes to Exceed Encore, this card's even better than Book of Moon, because the moment you enter your draw phase, you just activate Exceed Encore on their Exceed monster, you bounce it back to the extra deck. It doesn't matter if it was just summoned or whatever, and by bouncing it back to the extra deck and giving them monsters, which is honestly fine, you will trigger their My Friend Purrely if they have it, but just being able to prevent X-Purrely Noir coming down with +5+ like materials is honestly invaluable. And then in addition to that, by using it in draw phase, you're preventing your opponent from typically drawing 1 to 2 cards in the first place too. And like I said earlier, Purrely is a deck that typically ends with 1, maybe 2 cards if they're lucky in their hand at the end of their own turn. So, a lot of the times, just by activating Exceed Encore, you can straight up win the game. And I know I say that a lot, but I honestly do mean it. Cards like Exceed Encore, Dimensional Bear, just these massive blowout cards are honestly like one of the main reasons why decks like Purrely tend to struggle so much in the current metagame, despite being a super powerful deck. And with that, that's the end of the video. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and if you have any recommendations for what type of videos you want to see next, feel free to leave them down below. I'd be happy to try and help you with any decks that you guys are struggling with. And with that, I'll catch you guys next time. See ya!